Hello everybody, I'm Nick, and in this video I want to talk about how LINQ can be pretty problematic when you're tempted to use it to cut corners. And what do I mean by that? Because by definition LINQ is here to make our lives easier as C# developers. So you're sort of by definition cutting corners. But because LINQ applies to any type of enumerable, you might be tempted to use it in more places than you really should be using it, because it tries to adapt to every use case, leading to some issues. This video started as a code cop video where I found a misuse of LINQ, and I want to talk about it as a criticism for that post that I saw on LinkedIn. However, I think this is a teaching moment where we can all understand and actually make our code better and more explicit by not using LINQ in some scenarios. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to start with this image, which is the post I saw that tempted me to make that code cop video. So first and foremost, I wanted to talk about how bad these benchmarks are, because you should never run any sort of benchmark like this where you're getting the last item in a list, for example, and then you try to calculate how long that takes, because this does not return the person, and there is a chance that the fact that you don't actually return the person leads to the operation being taken out of a method, because that return value is not used anywhere. So what's the point of retrieving, for example, here that item? So if you ever write a benchmark like this, you want to actually write person here and then return that value straight to the method. That guarantees that you measure it correctly. Now, this benchmark says that don't use the last method on this person list. Instead, use the hat and then the one syntax, which means the first from the end, which is the last one, to get the last item in this enumerable. And this would be, as you can see here, many times faster. So 12 nanoseconds for the last method, while 0.04 nanoseconds, which is sort of immeasurable in a way, to get the last item using the index syntax. And the reason why I want to make a video about this is because you keep seeing bad benchmarks all the time. However, I think there's more into this particular post. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at these benchmarks, right? So I have the exact same benchmarks over here as that post had them, because that user actually linked to the code they wrote, which is amazing. If you write posts on LinkedIn with benchmarks, please provide the source code so people can run it and they can decide if it's actually true or not. Nothing necessarily wrong with how the code was set up, but like I said, you should not do this. You should actually return. And just to quickly prove that these benchmarks are more reliable, I will actually say returned over here, and I'm going to return the value straight over here and run the benchmarks again. So don't worry that I don't allocate a property. That property or that variable would actually be removed at compile time. So what you're going to see now is we're going to say release mode and run these 4 benchmarks to see if the claim that using last is actually so many more times slower than using the indexer. Now, before I move on, I'd like to let you know that we just released 2 brand new courses on Dome Train called From Zero to Hero Git and From Zero to Hero GitHub Actions. And they're 2 amazing courses authored by Scott Sober, who's extremely experienced in both topics. Now, you might think you know those topics, but trust me, the way Scott teaches them and the way he has dedicated sections on how to deal with things going wrong on each topic is extremely valuable. As I was reviewing it, I learned so much myself. Now, to celebrate the launch, the first 200 of you can use discount code GIT30 at checkout to get 30% off. Now, back to the video. So results are back, and let me show you what I have here. So as you can see, pretty comparable results, but I want you to see that when I actually return the value, things are slower, and things are significantly slower between the simple indexer and the indexer returned value, because less unrealistic optimizations are being used. So these, the returned values, are actually the real performance. Still significantly faster between the two, but now you see that even the simple returned one is fairly slower and more accurate to what it should be. So I'm going to just from now on delete the ones that don't actually return the user. But why am I making this video? Well, I'm making this video because when you have something like this person list over here, and you say, I want the last item, well, you might be tempted to just say, I want the last item, so dot last. And to be honest, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this approach. Like, it's totally fine to do that. But when you start thinking, okay, what type am I using? Why am I using the last method? Because you have a method and then you have the indexer, you would assume those two things will do the same thing. But it's actually not the case, because last has so many checks internally that make it so much slower without any reason. And yeah, there kind of is a reason. And the reason is that in this case, I kind of know that the list has at least one item, because if I have something like this and the list is empty, I'm going to get a big exception. And I'm also going to get a big exception on last, by the way, because last will throw if an item is not matched, while last or default won't throw. It will just return a default if configured or null otherwise. But then you go ahead in the last method and see what's happening, and there's so much code. First, it's an IEnumerable extension, so it's not tailored to the list, because if it was tailored to the list, then you can have an extension on the list and then get the last item using the indexer syntax, and that makes it so much faster. But what you actually see here is that we have a try get last method, extension method again, which is the try syntax. And what that does is it tries to match a specific type. So it says, hey, is it an I partition of type T source? If it is, then use this other try get last thing. And then whatever is in that method as well is being used, just making it jumping through hoops over and over again. And if not, hey, is it an I list? Which in this case it is. Then get the count. Is the count more than 0? Is it found? True. Get the last item using the count -1 syntax, which might make you wonder, by the way, that why is this using the count -1 syntax and not the #1, the indexer operator, like from the end syntax? And that's because, like with many things in C#, this syntax is syntactic sugar. It is not real on the compiler level. What the compiler will actually do here is it will actually get the count of this, and it will do count -1. We can see that using the IL viewer. So if I say IL viewer and I expand it, this code is just person list dot count -1. In case you didn't know, now you know. Otherwise, it will try to go into the enumerator and then use an enumerator, move next and try to match it and eventually match it at the end. So all that to say that when I am a developer where I know I'm working with a list and I want to get the last item and I know that the list has at least one item, why don't I just use this straight away? I should be using this straight away. Even if I don't know if this list has enough items, I should be person list dot count more than 0, not dot any, because dot any is another LINQ method with tons of checks that you don't need. So if count is more than 0, which means we have at least one item, then get the last. Otherwise, I don't know, return null or return person.default or some other value. But write code like this, not like this, because this will again be faster than this, and you have more control over exactly what's going on. And just to prove that this will be faster as well, even with the if check, I'm going to just say return null here. This is definitely not going to be null because this count will be more than 0. And if I just quickly run this just to show you how the two compare, even if I write more defensive code, then as you can see, we have again an incredible performance gap. No performance dent was made. This performs exactly as it did before, and is now also much safer because this won't throw anymore. So yeah, okay, it is not as fancy as saying dot last, but in my opinion, this is more explicit when you know what type you're dealing with. This is not just any IEnumerable, this is a list. Same thing if this was an array would have an indexer available for you to use. So if an indexer is available, do not use LINQ when you're going to get a specific item. So it is of my opinion that you should not cut corners when it comes to these types of value retrievals using LINQ. Just write the code itself. You're going to end up having way more descriptive and explicit code. But now I want to know from you, have you encountered such an issue before, and how are you approaching it? Are you using first, last? And I understand that first or default can have some very valid use cases when you're passing a predicate to them. But if you're not, and you have a list or an array or some type that is already enumerated, are you using the indexer straight away? Leave a comment down below, let me know. Well, that's all I have for you for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, keep coding.